We need a new system. We need a new society. We need to demand that which may have sounded impossible even a few weeks ago, but is not only realizable, but an imperative necessity. After 2 years of genocide, there is now a ceasefire in Gaza. B-52 bombers are in Venezuela's airspace. And on the home front, the Trump administration is waging a war against immigrant families and basic democratic rights. Welcome to the Socialist Program. I'm your host, Brian Becker. Today we're talking with Lee Camp. Lee is a comedian. He's a political commentator. He's the host of Unredacted Tonight on YouTube. You can find more of his work at leecamp.com. Lee, welcome back.
Hey, Brian. Good to talk to you again. It's been too long.
Yeah, great to talk with you as well. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. U.S. foreign policy, so-called endless war against people around the world, people in Palestine, people in Venezuela, people all over the Middle East, you name it. There's a lot to talk about there. But there is a war on the home front, a war waged by the Trump administration against democratic rights, against immigrant families. We have some amazing video from an ICE attack against working class families in Chicago. I'm going to play that. But before we do all of that, I want to get started with Israel. A ceasefire now. It's been 2 years of genocide. You've been covering it on your show, on Unredacted Tonight. I want to play a clip. It's from a recent show that you did a couple of weeks ago, and then I want to get your comments about the latest events.
The head of defense at the time of October 7th has admitted it. That's right. Yoav Gallant, the genocidal maniac and mahjong enthusiast himself, in an interview said of the Hannibal Directive, I think that tactically in some places it was given and in other places it was not given, and that's a problem. The IDF's own reports, as covered in Israeli media, admit the Air Force fired 11,000 shells, dropped more than 500 one-ton bombs, and launched 180 missiles on that day.
I want to get to the second part of that clip, Lee. I don't think most people in the United States would realize that the IDF, so-called the Israeli Defense Force, came in on October 7th, where the Hamas raid had taken place, and used this heavy amount of military equipment, bombs, against the areas where the Israeli hostages or people who have been taken captive actually were. Let's just talk about that.
Yeah, this is something I've been covering bits and pieces here and there since October 7th, 2 years ago now. And I guess there's some people who want to say, well, why are you still talking about this? And it's like, well, this was the supposed reason for this genocide. And Israel brings it up every chance they get in order to justify genocide, in order to justify ethnic cleansing. That's why you got to keep talking about it, because it is the casus belli or casus belli. I never get that right. Is it? I used to think that was the leaner, fatter part of the pork belly. But anyway, this is the reason for it all. And I think we do need to debunk all this garbage about October 7th. And so much of it has been admitted in bits and pieces, again, by Israel. The use of the Hannibal Directive, murdering hundreds of their own people. The New York Times, which is very pro-Israel, has done reporting on how Israel knew about the October 7th attack a year in advance and decided to either, let it happen or ignore it, however you want to phrase it. There are so many aspects of this that there's just so much propaganda around this whole thing. Even to this, now current day ceasefire, we're still referring, the mainstream media, most Americans, still referring to every Israeli in Hamas custody as hostages and every Palestinian in Israeli custody as prisoners, right? Israelis are hostages. Palestinians are prisoners. It gives you a nice feeling that all Palestinians that have been imprisoned by Israel must have done wrong, must have been convicted of something, when in fact, many of them have not been convicted of anything. Even those who were, quote unquote, convicted, saw an Israeli judge for like 60 seconds, and they said, yeah, convicted. So it's, a bull crap kangaroo court. And this is, again, just it all feeds into this propaganda web combined with October 7th to allow this ethnic cleansing that continues to this day.
Yeah, there's 11,000 Palestinians in Israeli jails. In a way, Lee, they're all hostages because it's not legal for Israel to arrest people from another nation.
Right.
1,700 were actually literally kidnapped after October 7th. So they're literally hostages. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about, as a Jewish person in the United States, as someone who pays careful attention to world politics, to Middle East politics, to the issues of racism or anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, all the different manifestations of bigotry. The calling card for the Israeli state for many, many decades, since the Nakba, since 1948, is that Israel was a safe haven for Jewish people as a consequence of all of the propaganda directed towards Jewish people in the United States, especially after 1967. There was huge support for the Israeli project. I mean, before that, by the way, there was very divided opinion within the Jewish community in Europe and in the United States about Zionism. I would say the majority opinion before World War II was anti-Zionist. But just talk about the shift, the change that has happened in the last 2 years.
Yeah, those are good points. Even Einstein was anti-Zionist, and I hear that fellow was fairly bright. He knew what he was talking about on a lot of issues. But I grew up. I mean, I continue to be Jewish, but I grew up Jewish, and at that time, we're taught that Israel is just this. It's just this thing in our lives, as if it's been there forever. It is the state for the Jewish people. It's the only thing that keeps Jews safe, which even Biden repeated that garbage, that if there were no Israel, Jews would not be safe anywhere. Which, if he's saying that, then what's he saying? That he's not going to protect Jews in America? That the moment Israel's, no longer in existence, well, that means we're going to start going after the Jews in America? I mean, it really is repulsive rhetoric. But you grow up with this idea that is this wonderful place, and you are given none of the real history. You're given none of the Nakba. You're given none of the fact that this has only been there, as an apartheid ethno-state for a few decades. It was voted into existence by the United Nations in 1947, and most people don't know the number of countries that voted it into existence was 33. There are near 200 countries today, and 33 voted it into existence in 1947, and many of those were pressured by the United States and Britain as well. So it really is utterly insane once you start to understand the reality of it. And, now as an adult, with an adult functioning brain, which I feel like we should all aim for, you just realize how wrong it is. It is the definition of apartheid. It's the definition of an ethno-state. It's the definition of racism. It's the definition of ethnic cleansing and genocide. All of those things, so I think Israel's assault, their real qualm is with the dictionary. They need to really go after that, and then maybe they can justify the horror show they're perpetrating. You really just, once you learn the facts, you kind of can never look back. And I think an important aspect, as a Jewish person in America, an important aspect to understand is Israel makes Jews much less safe. Israel creates anti-Semitism because they have worked very hard, the Israeli propaganda, very hard to connect and conflate all Jews with Israel. And so therefore, there are people that believe, because they've bought into the propaganda, that basically all Jews believe in anything Israel does, and all Jews want genocide of Palestinians. And it's wrong, but Israel has worked very hard to get you and everybody to believe that. And therefore, what anti-Semitism there is, I mean, the real stuff, not the stuff Israel accuses people of, what real anti-Semitism there is, it's a lot of it is because of Israel's propaganda and their efforts to get everyone to not understand the reality of the situation, the reality of what Israel is. There are also more Zionist Christians in America than there are Jews in the world. So to say, Zionism equals Judaism or vice versa is just ignorant. But I think ignorance is what Israel wants. And it's allied so closely with the United States. Let's not forget Netanyahu himself is essentially an American, grew up here, lived in Pennsylvania, went to school, went to MIT. This is an American ruling over Israel and committing genocide.
Real quick, and then I want to move on to another topic. The pro-Israeli narrative was undoubtedly the dominant narrative in the United States and certainly within the Jewish community. It's still very strong support within the Jewish community, but especially among young Jewish people, it feels to me that there has been a seismic shift, and that once people sort of come to a new consciousness, it's not going to be reversible. And I just wonder, from your point of view, what the impact will be long-term on the Zionist project if Jewish Americans, especially younger Jewish Americans, have shifted in their consciousness so dramatically.
Well, I don't know if I'm being slightly hopeful, but I think it's done. I think you can't, as much as they want to control the narrative, Israel has shown the world what they're capable of. They have shifted the entire global opinion away from this Zionist destruction. They really have written their own ending by committing a live stream, the first ever live stream genocide for the world to watch on TikTok until Larry Ellison cuts all that off. They really have written their own ending. And yes, they can continue to kind of lumber along like a zombie nation with U.S. funding that's pumped into Israel, U.S. arms that's pumped into Israel. But will they be much more than a battleship? I don't know that they ever. You cannot go back to some kind of normal or comfortable or stable genocidal apartheid nation. It's not really a thing in today's world, that you could do such a thing. So, and their economy is struggling immensely. You have hundreds of thousands have left Israel because they're dual citizens and they don't want to be there during a war. You have their economy is just kind of, a lot of it has collapsed because tourism was such a major factor, and some of the ports have collapsed. Really what keeps them going is just the United States. So as long as the U.S., pumps them full of our tax dollars so that Israelis can have health care and we can't, then maybe they can be a zombie nation. But I really think it's over.
Yeah, it's so interesting. When Donald Trump was asked at the White House a couple of weeks ago whether the Netanyahu government would annex the West Bank, and Trump said, no, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to let it happen. No, it's not going to happen, which very revealingly indicates that it's up to the United States what Israel does or doesn't do. And of course, that's true in all ways. If the United States said, well, we're done sending you weapons, we're done. We're just not going to do it anymore.
Yeah. The
thing would wrap up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I had pointed that out in an article on my Substack the other day, that Politico and some other outlets were kind of unintentionally admitting that Trump could have ended this, and that's saying we're in a ceasefire or some level of ceasefire. The Palestinians are still being killed, but at least some level of ceasefire ongoing right now. Trump could have done this at any point during his administration, as could Joe Biden. And Politico was saying that what kind of lit a fire under Trump's ass was the bombing in Qatar, that, Trump has business interests there. Qatar's an ally. There's a bunch of reasons that it kind of got him more motivated to actually end this thing. So he then pressured Israel, and more than he had before. He also got the Arab states in line more than he had before. And it really is an admission that, like, all he had to do was decide he's doing it. And that's not something to be, I'm not trying to, build up Trump's power. Biden could have decided he's doing it as well. But it just goes to show this is not out of American hands. The United States has decided to allow and fund and arm and perpetrate and propagandize this genocide from day one. And we're seeing that now. It could have been ended on day one.
Lee, the U.S. military budget is officially getting close to the $1 trillion mark. Unofficially, when you look at all the different agencies that really fund war, death, and destruction, it's about $1.5 trillion. So it's a very big part of the U.S. budget. In terms of its discretionary budget, the U.S. federal discretionary budget, it's the biggest single item, in fact, second only to debt service to the banks, basically to pay interest for past wars like the Vietnam War, the Korean War, you name all the wars.
Yeah.
You did a number of studies and a number of shows about, and I talked to you about this in the past, the Pentagon, which has this huge amount of money, doesn't pass audits. It can't account for the money. You've done some like really important work. I mean, as a comedian, your work is comedic. It's funny. It's entertaining. It's also very serious in terms of the content and what you're revealing. I mean, when you think about the fact that B-52 bombers are now in Venezuelan airspace, the U.S. is blowing up boats in the Caribbean. It's funded a genocide for the last 2 years. American taxpayers pay for the whole thing. The Pentagon just takes all of this money, all of these resources. At the same time, the government says, well, we can't pay for that expanded Medicaid coverage to cover the doctor bills or the ability of poor or low-income working class families to go to a doctor. And yet the Pentagon can't find this stuff that it paid for. Anyway, like a remarkable level of looting. I would say if we want to talk about plunder, pillaging, and looting, we could actually start with the Pentagon.
Yeah, Trump loves to, right? He's invading every U.S. city because he says there's crime there, even though most of these cities are at a low level for crime. But what he's referring to and what our mainstream media will refer to when they say crime is street crime. They're talking about someone stealing a car, stealing a wallet. They don't talk about the actual large-scale crime, which is, $1 trillion dumped into this Pentagon, which I've before called it the largest money laundering scheme in human history, because a lot of that $1 trillion gets laundered through the Pentagon so we can go national defense. It's protecting all of us. And then where does it end up? Well, a lot of it ends up in the pockets of contractors, in the pockets of billionaires and soon-to-be trillionaires. So it really is just a massive money laundering scheme. But yeah, as you mentioned, they have now only failed a mere, I believe it's still 7 audits. So only 7 audits failed, and I'm pretty sure they're going to just nail one soon. As they say, every time they fail an audit, they say, we're getting closer. And, the IRS was fine with me saying that as well. They've audited me 7 times, and I just said, I don't know what's going on. And they said, you'll get them next time. They love that. But yeah, each couple years, they audit themselves, and they've never passed one. This last audit, they did admit that they cannot account. The Pentagon cannot account for 63% of all of their assets. They do not know where 63% of their assets are. This means almost literally they don't know their assets from their elbows. And it's amazing the amount of stuff they don't know where it is, where it's being held, it's in a computer that they have certain parts, but they can't actually find them. They've literally found, Black Hawk helicopters to the tune of millions and millions of dollars that they didn't know they had. They've found whole streets because they own a lot of property. They've found whole streets, city blocks they own that they've have forgotten about or didn't know. They found warehouses filled with millions and millions of dollars of parts that they didn't realize they had. It is laughable. I mean, Defense Secretary Gates, when he was leaving, he tried to get to the bottom of some of it, and he said in a press conference that he basically gave up, threw his hands up, said, "We don't know where it's going. We don't know where the money's going. We don't know what's going on." And he said, "We literally couldn't figure out how many people work in a department. Like, they don't even know what humans they have there." And I'll add a little Trump-specific nugget to this, which is, we're talking about the $1 trillion. What is it? 55% or more of discretionary spending goes to our war machine, to death and destruction. David Dayen at the American Prospect wrote a great article about the fact that the government shutdown, everyone talks about it starting a few weeks ago, but his point is it essentially had started several weeks or months prior, because Trump was refusing to actually give out the money that had been allotted by Congress to anything he didn't like. So the $1 trillion still goes to the Pentagon. The whatever millions and billions goes to ICE. The billions goes to DHS, etc. That all goes out. But anything that money doesn't go out. So essentially, he has taken over the Congress's ability to hold the purse strings, which is one of the only things they do anymore. And he had shut down large portions of government way prior to the government shutdown. But the Pentagon, $1 trillion a year, that money's still flowing. Oh, man, is it flowing.
You know, it's interesting what you said about Congress. Congress actually has two specific powers that the executive branch doesn't have. One is the power to declare war. Only Congress can declare war. And the last time it availed itself of its legislative, constitutionally mandated power, authority to declare war, was 1941. So that would have been at the start of World War II. So we had the Korean War, the Vietnam War, 2 Iraq wars, the Afghanistan War, the Libya War, the Panama War, the Yugoslav War. None of that was as a consequence of Congress declaring war. So they gave that power to the president.
What about war on trans people? Did they do that one?
Yeah, that's coming. I'm going to ask you about that. The second power that they have is the power of the purse, meaning only Congress, only the elected representatives of the people can make decisions about spending money. So the executive branch implements and executes how the federal government works, but the allocation of monies is from the Congress. Now, if Congress has already given up its authority to declare war and has now given up its authority to actually allocate, authorize, and disperse funds, well, it can disperse them, but it's up to the president now, apparently under Trump. That means Congress is meaningless. So the point I'm getting to is that we are moving very dramatically to a hyper-accelerated aggregation of executive power, which once upon a time was conflated with dictatorship, or what people popularly understood as dictatorship. Now, there's another element where this is going, and this, I think, is very pronounced within the Trump administration because it's very conscious. They want to aggregate this executive power. The Democrats in Congress are doing really nothing except whining. I mean, and the idea of shutting down the government as their only capacity, their only ability to fight Trump is ridiculous. But Trump recently issued another one of these executive orders, and they're all based on an emergency. There's an emergency everywhere. And that gives the president executive power. So it's called National Security Presidential Memorandum Number 7, Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence. Now, this is a real power grab, Lee. I want to play a clip. It's where Trump announces this new executive order based on this new emergency. And then Stephen Miller, who, I know that there was like central casting for the World War II Nazi movies, or movies where Goebbels and the other Nazi leaders, he looks like he comes from central casting, but I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on him. But listen to him. You don't have to look at him. You can just listen to him. Here's Trump giving him the floor where he, Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, explains what this new countering domestic terrorism and organized political violence is all about. And remember, everyone, think about the idea of aggregating executive power in an all-powerful White House. In other words, in a dictatorial use of authority. Listen to this clip.
Steve, could you say a couple of words?
Yes, Mr. President. This is a very historic and significant day. This is the first time in American history that there is an all-of-government effort to dismantle left-wing terrorism, to dismantle Antifa, to dismantle the organizations that have been carrying out these acts of political violence and terrorism. What we have seen, if you look at whether it be going back to the riots that started with Black Lives Matter and all the way through to the Antifa riots, the attacks on ICE officers, the doxing campaigns, and now the political assassinations, these are not lone, isolated events. This is part of an organized campaign of radical left terrorism. It is structured, it is sophisticated, it is well-funded, it is well-planned. There is really no parallel like this to anything else in the country right now. There is an entire system of feeder organizations that provide money, resources, weapons, and when they're attacking ICE officers, they're attacking federal buildings, or they're isolating public officials for harassment, doxing, intimidation, and ultimately attempted assassination. It is all carefully planned, executed, and thought through. It is terrorism on our soil. Because of this executive order, Cash and Pam are going to have the tools they need, working with Scott, to take these organizations apart piece by piece. And the central hub of that effort is going to be the Joint Terrorism Task Force, or JTTF, which sits inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
All right, Lee Camp, go ahead.
Well, I like Stephen Miller because he has resting sociopath face. It's on one level it's hilarious. On the other level, it's freaking terrifying. But you know, he says they're going to carefully disrupt and dismantle these organizations. Well, that should be easy considering there's no organizations. Like there is no large scale, whatever they call it, leftist, Marxist, terrorist web it doesn't exist. And, you know, it's tough to know how much of this is just true paranoia on, you know, the fascist Trump's in his brain and Stephen Miller's brain, and how much of it is just used to go after many others, to go after, millions of Americans by claiming that they are somehow connected to any one of these groups or ideas. I mean, if you actually read the order, it talks about going after anti-capitalism, anti-Americanism, anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the U.S. government, extremism on migration, race, and gender. Well, what do you think those lunatics view as extreme on things like migration, race, and gender? Oh, maybe thinking that every human has a right to exist? Wow, that sounds crazy extremist. Maybe thinking that women shouldn't have to be barefoot in the kitchen? That sounds crazy extreme. So what their view of extremism is really just being a normal, moral human being. And this memo opens up the some sort of attempted legal justification to go after anyone they want to. And in that way, it's very scary. But of course, on the other hand, their paranoia is kind of hilarious. I know The Daily Show did a mashup of their words about like Portland, Oregon. It's war, it's chaos, it's on fire. And then mash that with the videos of naked bike riders peacefully bike riding along and people in mascot outfits dancing in front of ICE. And that's the reality of it. The reality is so far from what they're talking about. It, again, laughable, also horrifying.
Well, the thing about Portland, where they've deployed federal forces, according to Trump, it burns down every night.
Yeah, and somehow they rebuild it the next day and
it's
burn
amazing.
it down again. Burn it down
every night, Lee, it burns, and then somehow it's back, and then it burns the next. It's like Groundhog Day.
It's amazing. Also, this, one of the big pushes for this was the death of Charlie Kirk. And then within it, he mentions the 2 assassination attempts against him, Trump. there's little to no evidence that these people are left-wingers at all. Tyler Robinson, very well, if you believe what they're telling us, very well may have done it because he was tired of their trans hate. But that is the only thing that seems to be a somewhat left-wing belief of Tyler Robinson. If you actually follow his upbringing and everything, there's nothing really left-wing about it, even down to the fact that he's quite good with a rifle and into hunting. And then you take the guy who shot Trump's ear, and there's no sign that was a left-winger. He had, obviously mental issues, and he had looked up, according to his Google searches, where various politicians were appearing near him. He looked up where Biden was going to be, and it just so happened Trump was, speaking closest to his town. So this list of these left-wing assassins that are ninjas that are running through our country is also very laughable. There are way, way, way more right-wing, far-right attacks on officials, on people, on mass shootings are often right-wingers. I do. Here, I'll throw him a bone here. I would agree with Trump if he's saying we have to go after the key thing uniting almost all mass shooters. We need to go after the thing that is clearly an aspect of nearly 99% of them males. They're all males. All right. So clearly we need to lock up men, all men, because they are the ones committing the mass shootings. They're the ones shooting at Trump's ear. It's just men. And another important fact that David Swanson's the only one I've seen doing reporting on this is that a third of all the mass shooters have some connection to the U.S. military. Either the ex-military, their ROTC, that's where they got their gun training, etc. So that is another major factor that is almost never mentioned by your mainstream media. In fact, there's much evidence of mainstream media pretending that there's been only one or two mass shooters that were connected to the military. Of course, false.
Yeah. And, this whole thing is pretextual. It's clearly pretextual. They're spinning this narrative. Miller is basically saying every act of violence is connected to another act of violence. They mention the, quote, Black Lives Matter riots, as they put it, which is the uprising that took place starting in 2014 against another police murder, this time in Ferguson, Missouri. They link it to the rebellion, the nationwide rebellion against racism following the killing of George Floyd. The summer of 2020, 35 million people in the largest mass protests, sustained protests, came out into the streets. They don't talk about January 6th. That escapes any sort of mention in the narrative. It's cherry picking things, then linking them together when there's no linkage, as you've pointed out.
Or they don't talk about the assassination of the Speaker of the House in Minnesota because that was a right-winger. They don't talk about Nancy Pelosi's husband having his skull bashed in because that was a right-winger. So, yeah, they had to both include people who should not be listed as left-wing, and they had to ignore all right-wing violence.
Now, there's another part of the memorandum that I want to quote to you, Lee, And again, you've said it's both hilarious and scary because this is obviously used by a federal government that has a lot of power in an effort to basically suppress dissent. That's really what they're doing. They're hoping to either intimidate people, have people self-censor out of fear, or actually just, pretextually find a reason to criminally investigate them. But listen to the language in the memorandum, and I want to get your comments. The United States requires a national strategy to investigate and disrupt networks, entities, and organizations that foment political violence so that law enforcement can intervene in criminal conspiracies before, critical word here, before they result in violent political acts. So, meaning there won't have to be an actual crime committed or a violent act committed. This effort to use the Joint Terrorism Task Force of the FBI will be to interdict, as Miller says, interfere with, disrupt, take down, basically end organizations that are involved in free speech protest, protected speech protest, people engaged in dissent, people availing themselves of the First Amendment to redress grievances, and say, look, we have to take them down even though they haven't committed a criminal act, because they're going to commit a criminal act. So the whole notion here is conspiracy, or the alleged conspiracy, takes away the requirement of the government to cite probable cause, meaning the government or the police agency says that there's a probable cause that you or me or someone committed a crime in order to carry out a criminal prosecution of those people or persons. That probable cause requirement is gone if it's done as sort of preventive crime, preventive law enforcement. We're going to crack down and arrest you because we think you're going to commit a crime. I mean, that in essence does away with the basic democratic rights of a fair trial and of the right to not be arrested or searched or seized by a government just because the government wants to.
Yeah, I think it's called pre-crime. They want to arrest us for pre-crime, and it sounds so weird. I feel like it would make a great dystopian movie starring Tom Cruise or something. If someone did a movie on that, maybe called Minority Report or something like that. I think it would be excellent because it is so dystopian and horrifying. But yeah, they want to arrest you for pre-crime, for having thoughts that are anti-capitalist, as if anyone could be anti-capitalist. Why would you ever? It's just causing the death spiral of humanity. What's the problem? You silly fella. Arrest you for pre-crime. And you know what else it reminds me of is there was that study that I think it came out in like 2016 or something. And, I don't know if it's been updated, but showing that the FBI was somehow involved in 90-some% of all terror arrests inside the United States. They were either informants, they were providing information, they were providing materials, they were always involved with terror plots. And often when one of them would actually happen, it was because they didn't get there in time. They basically helped create the plot, and then something happened and they didn't arrest the person. So the FBI is involved in a vast number of anything that's actually some sort of real plot. They find some poor sap who has mental issues, and they then, talk him into trying to do something that's utterly horrific. And so I think by this latest memorandum, Trump should probably be arresting a lot of the FBI for pushing forward these terror plots. And, I think he should have an easy time finding them. I think they're all kind of in one building down in D.C. He could do a great favor by arresting them, I think.
I want to play some video. It's disturbing video. It's from Chicago. The Trump White House has sent 1,000 ICE agents, masked men, into Chicago, again, creating a false pretext of Chicago's out of control. It's like Chicago, Portland, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles. It's not like Americans living there. These are enemy combatants, and they have to be treated with a military force. But the ICE agents are clearly out of control. And again, if you criticize an ICE agent, then that shows that you are part of this vast left-wing conspiracy. But people nonetheless are out protesting because the crimes against the immigrant families and against the black community, native-born black communities in Chicago. I mean, it's so racist, the whole campaign. Here's part of this 1,000 ICE agent detachment in Chicago, attacking working class families, tear gassing them. I don't know if it's in this clip. At the very end of the clip, you see this man with a infant in a stroller, and he's trying to get the kid out of there, and they're tear gassed. It's a war at home. Anyway, let's play this clip.
Herman, get back!
Where is she at?
I don't know.
You can see some of the tear gas. We have some B-roll, which will roll in the background. It's like a war zone. Completely premeditated attacks against people who are at peace, going to work, picking up their kids, going shopping. It's a war at home, Lee.
Well, what you're seeing is Trump the peacemaker. He's brought peace to America. Sometimes peace looks kind of ugly. Sometimes it doesn't look so fun, but this is what peace looks like. And I got to thank him for bringing so much peace to America. It's a beautiful thing to witness. Also, I'm very excited that, according to the Geneva Conventions, you can't use chemical weapons except on your own people. So luckily, Trump, his administration, and these lovely folks in the camo gear can use chemical weapons on us, and that's another beautiful thing about our international law. Not that Trump would care if there were international laws saying he couldn't tear gas people. It's horrifying to see. It is kind of done in a more forthright manner than the U.S. has been doing it for years, separating families, deporting people, grabbing people up, black bagging them. The difference is now Trump is doing it, showing up at restaurants where everyone can witness the goons with, military force grabbing waiters and waitresses and black bagging them and not letting them tell their family where they're headed and things like that. It's straight up. I mean, if this isn't fascism, I don't know what it is. There's largely no habeas corpus. Trump officials have even said that these people are not entitled to any habeas corpus, which was supposed to be some sort of foundational stone of our country, of the rights of our country. And I saw a Reuters article, because they wanted to. They want to make sure Hamas is always viewed as horribly as possible, so they describe them as masked, armed men, freed the hostages or something. But for some odd reason, you don't see enough mainstream media call these goons masked, armed men. Masked, armed men showed up into apartment buildings and kidnapped people. That would be an accurate headline as opposed to ICE arrests immigrants, or however they phrase it.
Lee, there's a lot of talk about censorship in the United States. We're going to end on this. For a week, Jimmy Kimmel was taken off the air. There was a big protest movement against that. He was brought back by the network. A lot of people never get on the network because there's kind of a pre-censorship censorship. So that people who are real critics of the establishment or who are anti-capitalist, who are genuinely anti-war, certainly anti-imperialist, those people don't get on mainstream media. They did for a little bit, once in a while, about 20 years ago. You call yourself the most censored comedian. I don't know if it's in the country or in the world, but and I know there's no hyperbole intended.
Just the country, because I know there's comedians in Egypt that are in prison. So
yeah. Anyway, you have been censored. You were taken off of social media platforms. Again, because you were telling the truth. You were exposing American government propaganda for what it is. Telling the truth about society. You were the target of big censorship, but you are available to people. You have a show, Unredacted Tonight. You're on social media. How do people find you?
Thank you. Yeah, it was kind of comical for me to watch the whole Jimmy Kimmel fury and the Colbert fury. I guess he's kicked out of his contract next year. Where, a lot of the mainstream media wanted to say this is the first time a comedian's been censored or taken off the air. Of course, I lost my TV show 3 years ago due to U.S. sanctions, and I had my podcast banned on Spotify. My TikTok was banned 2 years ago, so I was way ahead of the curve on TikTok as well, and my YouTube channel was banned around the world. So, yeah, as far as I know, I haven't heard anybody have a good argument that there's any comedian in America more censored than I am. There are those who like to cry foul like Dave Chappelle, but Dave Chappelle is also on the biggest platforms in the world and has $100 million deal with Netflix. So I wouldn't exactly call that censored. But yes, I do, despite all of this, I continue to put out my anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist comedy. It is on YouTube. It is on these platforms to some degree. Sometimes I have to create new channels to make up for the one they've banned. It's called Unredacted Tonight, is the newer show. It's been out for a few months now. People can find the whole playlist at leecamp.com/unredacted. And I'm also on Substack. Real Lee Camp is my name on Substack. So hopefully you'll pick one of those and check it out and give it a chance. And if you're kind of the fan of the Daily Show, but you kind of hate that they're semi-liberal, semi-imperialist, then you'd really like my stuff, I think. So.
All right. Lee Camp, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate it.